Alrighty, everyone. Thanks for joining me. This is your host, ID Jester. Welcome to our new tutorial slash playthrough slash test game of Panzer battles. This is the 11th Panzers on the Cheer River. This is a game that is designed by Dean Essig, and the game developer is Lee Forrester. It's part of the Standard Combat series from the Gamers and produced by Multi-Man Publishing. So I'm going to be going through a scenario here, but before we do that, we're going to actually delve into the Standard Combat series of games out there. There's quite a few games out there. When we talk specifically about rules, though, we'll be referencing the Panzer battle rules. So each module has their own specific scenarios and specific rules associated with that module. So some of the module rules for Panzer will apply to your module, but it might not. So be sure to check your rule book to see how your module does things. After we go through some of the tutorial stuff and get some of the information out of the way, then we're actually going to play through a scenario. But first, we're going to be looking at the actual rules. We're going to be using version 1.8 of the scenario rules as our reference guide. And as I mentioned, we're going to be using the scenario rules, the Standard Combat Series rules for Panzer Blitz. And in particular, we're actually going to be playing scenario 2.3 State Farm 79, and hopefully it'll be a good time. We'll learn a lot of good stuff together. We'll get to analyze the series, talk some tactics, show you how the game plays, and hopefully have a lot of fun doing it. So be sure to like and subscribe if you're new to my channel, and hopefully we'll see you soon. So let's actually talk about the units now and actually what they represent, all the numbers and symbols on them. So first thing we're going to look at here is this number right there in the circle. That's going to tell you how many steps that unit has, and in this case, its unit has 2 steps. This unit also has 2 steps. The next number on the counter that we're going to look at is this number here on the left-hand side. That is its lower unit designation. So this is going to be the lower unit designation. And on the right-hand side of it, in this case the 15th Panzer, that's going to be its higher assignment, if it has any. Of course, right here is going to tell you the unit size of the unit. And of course, it's going to have the NATO designation of what kind of unit it's going to be inside the middle. And then on the bottom left-hand side, this is going to be its attack strength. In this case, it's a 7. It's going to have its defensive strength, which in this case, it's a 4. And then last but not least is its movement allowance, and that is on the bottom right-hand side. So in this case, 12. The last thing of note is this actual yellow bar here. Not all units have a yellow bar. If they do have a yellow bar, though, they are what they called exploit capable units, and there's a special exploitation phase that this unit will be able to activate in. In Panzer battles, part of the Standard Combat series, most units exert a zone of control around into the 6 adjacent hexes that is adjacent to the actual unit. The only units that don't do this are ones that do not have an attack strength or have an attack strength of 0. You must have an attack strength of at least 1 to exert zones of control into all of the adjacent hexes. It should be noted that only units exert zone of controls into actual areas that the unit can actually go into. So for example, if this unit was on this side of the river, it would not exert a zone of control into this hex because this unit could move into that hex. So it only exerts the zone of control into the hexes that it could physically go into. For an enemy unit to enter into your zone of control, it's going to cost them 2 additional movement points. So in this case, if the German unit here is activated to move, it would cost him 1 movement point to move there, and then it would cost him 3 movement points to move there, 1 for the clear hex and 2 for moving adjacent. As long as you have enough movement points, you can move through enemy zones of control. So to go to this space would cost him another 2 movement points for the zone of control and another movement point for the clear hex. Once again, 1 movement point for the clear hex, 2 for the zone of control. And once again, even though there's 2 units here, 1 movement point to enter that hex and 2 to enter the zone of control. And then to go there would cost him another movement point and 2 more because it's in an enemy zone of control. To leave an enemy zone of control doesn't cost anything extra. An important rule for the Standard Combat Series is if your unit starts its activation in an enemy zone of control, that unit is unable to use overrun combat. So this unit here is inside this unit's zone of control. If it's activated for movement, it cannot do an overrun because it started inside the zone of control of this unit here. The other thing is, units can only attack enemies that are in their zone of control unless they're doing a barrage attack. One thing of note about zones of control is they will block supply for the unit. Let's say this German unit needs to check his supply, which is over here. Enemy unit's zone of control will block that supply. So to trace supply, this unit's needed to go into these hexes to get back to the supply source. But this zone right here is inside this enemy's zone of control, so it'll be blocked. And if the German tries to get supply through this hex, it's also inside this unit's zone of control. So this unit will be marked as out of supply in the phase when we check for supply status, as he cannot get access to a supply source because the enemy zones of control are blocking it. One thing that will allow it to do it is enemy zones of control are nullified by friendly zones of control. So in this case, the enemy protrudes a zone of control in there, which is nullified because of this unit's zone of control. So he would be able to trace supply through this hex, into this hex, into this hex, back to supply, or through this hex, into this hex, and back to his supply. So friendly units, their zone of control will nullify enemy zone of control, but just for supply purposes only. And one other very important thing about zone of control is if the Russian units here attack this German stack and force these German stacks to retreat 2 hexes, anytime you retreat into an enemy zone of control, you must take a step loss. So you can see whether the units go into this hex or this hex, they're going to end up being into and adjacent into the enemy's zone of control. So in this case, this unit is going to have to take a step loss and then retreat again, taking another step loss because they're still in an enemy zone of control. So anytime you end up going into an enemy zone of control during a retreat, you will end up taking a step loss. Friendly units do not block that. Again, you can have friendly units and enemy units zone of controls in a hex. So in this hex right here, this enemy has a zone of control in this, as well as our German unit has a zone of control in this. If these Russians again attacked this German unit, forced him to retreat, again, moving into there would cause this unit to take a step reduction because this is an enemy zone of control and it's not nullified by a friendly unit. So this unit would take a step loss during the retreat. And hopefully our last example about zones of control, again, these Russian units ended up attacking this German unit, forcing the German unit to retreat. Well, then it ended up retreating back into this hex. In this example, let's do it like this. This is a better example for us. Causing this unit to retreat 2 spaces, the unit could retreat 1 space and then 2 space. The advance after combat, you do not have to worry about enemy zones of control or moving through or into enemy zones of control. So in this case, these units could move 1 and 2 spaces into this hex right here, following that unit after its retreat. And the fact that this unit has zone of control in that hex has no effect on an advance after a combat. The stacking limit for Panzer battles is going to be 3 units in a hex. Again, each of the different modules for the standard combat series are going to be slightly different, so be sure to check your rule book to make sure, as each one is different. The time you're going to check for stacking is at the end of each player's phase. The instant an overrun is declared, and at the end of an advance after combat. So normally you're going to be checking for overstacking at the end of the player's phase. The moment you are doing an overrun, and after you advance after combat, you're going to check for stacking at that time. Let's talk about movement and some of the most important things about the standard combat series. What I'm going to do here is actually remove a couple of these counters here to make it a little easier for us to see. If these units have been activated for movement, movement in this game, a standard combat series, is a lot like a lot of the other games. Units or stacks of units are going to move together, and they're going to spend a number of movement points based upon the terrain or the terrain hex sides they enter. In Panzer battles, you can see a lot of the area is open and clear. To get the road bonus, units need to follow the road movement from hex to hex. So in this case, if these units move from here to here, it's going to cost them 1 movement point. And then it's going to cost them a half a movement point to move there. And then it's going to cost them 2.5 movement points to move there. The reason it costs them 2.5, again, is because this unit exerts a zone of control into the hex, and it costs them 2 extra movement points. So it costs them 1 movement point to move there, a half a movement point, and a half a movement point, and then 2 movement points to move adjacent to them. Now, one of the most interesting things about the standard combat series is during the movement phase, units are going to be able to actually perform an attack that they call an overrun. And what you're going to do is you're going to use, during your movement, you're going to move up adjacent to an enemy, and then you're going to declare an overrun into that hex. And an overrun attack is going to be handled just like a normal combat attack. So in this case, these units have been activated for movement. Again, cost them 1, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4. And then you're going to declare an overrun into that hex. And an overrun costs 2 movement points to do an overrun. You will then roll on the chart to find out your results. And that unit will then be done with its movement after it finishes any advance after combat. So in this case, we have a total value of 13 versus a defense of 5. Now, one of the really interesting things about the standard combat series, unlike a lot of other attack to defender ratio games, is this game you're going to get your total attack factor and your total defensive factors, and you're going to figure out what the difference is. So in this case, 13 to 5, and you're going to divide those and come up with a number, which I'm going to have to get a calculator out because I'm not sure. All right, we got our number down. You might want to get a calculator and keep it handy. In this case, the answer is 2.6. Anytime in standard combat series, you have a value that is 0.5 or higher, up to 0.99, you're going to round that up. And anytime you get a value of 0.1 to 49, you're going to round that number down. So in this case, 2.6 is rounded up to 3. So in this case, 3-to-1 combat will ensue, which is really good because you don't have to really try to get all of the factors worked out to the best of your ability. This game should be played fast and loose and not having to worry about, well, if this is a 5 defensive value, I need to have at least 15 points to make it a 3-to-1. And which one of my units can I move up here to make it a 3-to-1? In this case, all I need is to get 2.6 to make it a 3-to-1 odds. So that is a really interesting and cool way of making the game even more easier and playable for the players. Let's take a look at the sequence of play in Panzer battles so you have an idea of the flow of a player's turn. So the first thing you're going to do is draw an activation sheet, and we'll look at that here in just a minute. Then we have the barrage phase that happens. After that, you'll do any road movement. You'll have regular movement. You'll have a combat phase. You'll have an exploitation phase. You will have a supply phase where units check for supply. And then you will have a GG removal phase to remove any GG markers that unit might have. Then you're going to go back and draw another chit and repeat the process over and over again. And we're going to look at each one of these a little bit individually. But you can see we just looked at movement. So during the movement phase, we just did an overrun attack. Then we have the combat phase. So a unit could do a combat phase. And then again, those units that have the yellow bar on them, like this unit here, can then also do an exploitation phase and have a third combat. So if you plan and do your attacks properly, you could possibly have a unit do 3 consecutive attacks. An overrun attack during the movement combat, a normal combat attack during the combat phase, and then an overrun attack during the exploitation phase. And the ability to get yourself in position to use your units to the best of your abilities and try to get as much out of those units as you can is part of understanding the standard combat system. Okay, step 1, draw activation chit. So each side is going to have a certain number of activation chits. Again, your game module might be different, but in Panzer battles, here are the activation chits. And each side is going to take all of their activation chits and put them inside a cup or some kind of way to draw them so you don't know, you can't see it or anything. And it's kind of a blind draw. And it's going to tell you which one of these units or which one of these chits, when you draw it, is going to tell you which units are going to be able to activate during that activation. There's also sometimes in Panzer battles, I don't know if this is throughout the Standard Combat Series, there's also a dummy chit. So this chit here is just a dummy. It's kind of like a blank. So if you draw this chit out, you would just end up missing your activation. So you can see that with these dummy chits, your opponent might be able to get to activate multiple times. And you can see here for the German player, there's actually 3 of the 11th Division Panzer chits. So they're going to actually get to activate 3 times during each turn. Now sometimes this scenario will tell you which one of these chits, or which ones of these chits, will end up going into the cup at the beginning of the scenario. And sometimes you have to look at the scenario outline to kind of show you which one of these chits go into the cup at which time. And it'll also tell you which units get to activate during these. So in this case, if the German player drew out, let's say this one, he would get to activate the 1st Tank and 5th Mech Corps. And these would be the only ones that would get to activate with this token. If he drew, say, this one, this is the All Infantry and Cavalry chit, he would only get to activate those units. If he drew out the dummy counter, he would get to activate no units. So you can see how just the chaos of battle forms by having these chits in cups. I should mention that each player has their own cup. You don't combine these into one cup. Each unit, or each side, has their own cup. And a lot of times this scenario will tell you who's the first player, and that player will get to draw out the first chit. Or sometimes the actual scenario will tell you which is the first chit to activate. In our scenario, the 11th Panzer chit is automatically drawn first, and then those units will activate. Speaking of our scenario, State Farm 79, here is the outline. Playing area, the first turn, the last turn, who has the initiative, in this case the Soviet player, and then the activation. The first turn begins with the 11th Panzer Division chit having just been pulled, and play begins with that. Note that German's non-11th Panzer chit is still in play, even though there are no German units that actually activate it when it's pulled. And you can see it also outlines all of the activation chits that will be in the cup. In this case, the Soviet 1st Tank, the Soviet All Cav, and a dummy chit. The Germans will have the 11th Panzer, which is the chit that was just drawn, the German non-11th Panzer, and 1 dummy chit. And then starting on turn 2, all player chits are put into the respective cup, starting on turn 2. Step 2, barrages. There's actually quite a bit to talk about when we're talking about barrages, so we'll probably go through those rules and then cut this video short. So one thing we didn't mention at the beginning was barrage is. This is their barrage number, and there is their range here inside this circle. So you can see this has a barrage strength of 2 and a range of 3. This unit has a barrage strength of 3 and a range of 3. To be able to barrage an enemy, you have to have an adjacent unit to that enemy to be able to barrage. Notice the barrage step happens before the movement phase. So you are going to try and set up your units the turn before in advantageous positions and during your movement phase to get those units into position to barrage enemies. Based upon how things go and the retreats and the advances after combat, you're going to try and get your positions for your barrage units to get into position and have an enemy unit adjacent to it. Of course, your module might be slightly different. I know Day of Days has some different rules for barrages, so make sure you check your module on exactly how barrages work. It should note that any hill hex, if we scoot over here, any hill hex will allow someone to see with a spot for artillery up to 6 hexes away in Panzer battles. So I just wanted to make sure we talked about that really quickly. And I've moved all my stuff, which didn't help. Let's see here. I think I messed this all up. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, okay, there we go. So, you can see that this unit here is within range. 3 hexes away. It has a unit that's adjacent that can spot for it. Even if this unit didn't have line of sight to the enemy for whatever reason, the unit that's adjacent to it will basically be calling in that artillery strike. The process is going to be, you're going to simply roll a die and you're going to compare it to the barrage strength. Note, you cannot combine barrage strengths into a hex. So you could not combine these 3 with this 2 to get a 5 total. Each barrage unit does it individually. So in this case, we need to roll a 3 or less to have a successful barrage. In this case, we're going to say we rolled a 2. So in that case, we actually barraged, oops, keep sliding that, sorry. We had a successful barrage in this hex. And in that case, all the units become DG'd that are in the hex. If you get a successful result from a barrage, the next thing you're going to do is roll for what they call a kill roll. And based upon your module, it might be different, but in Panzer battles, you're going to get a kill roll on a 4 or higher. It will be a yellow box. If it's a German 88, it's a 5 or higher, and any other unit will be a 6 or higher. So any unit will get a kill result on a 6 or higher. If it's a German 88 unit, it'll be a 5 or higher. And if it is a yellow boxed number, it would be 4 or higher. In Panzer battles, the side that has the air power associated with it, in this case, in this scenario, it's going to be the Soviets, it is determined automatically to have a yellow box. So whenever the Soviets do their air barrages, it will be a 4 or higher for a kill number. You only get the kill number, though, if you're successful on the barrage. So in this case, if this unit here rolls a 4, 5, or 6, that would be a miss. The unit does not get a DG marker, and you would move on to the next one. In this case, we need a 1 or 2 for this unit. Let's say we rolled a 3. That unit is unsuccessful as well. So the first thing you have to do is score a success. And it should be noted that anytime you roll a 1, anytime you roll 1, it's an automatic success on a barrage. As far as air units go in this game, you do not need to have a spotter. They have an unlimited amount of area. They can barrage any place on the map, basically, and they do not need a spotter for that. And again, in Panzer battles, they are considered yellow boxed or yellow coated, so they will get a kill number. So first thing you need to do for a barrage is get a success, a hit, then you're going to roll again to see if it does damage. If you do end up getting a damage, let's say this unit here, rolls a 6. After he scored a successful hit, this unit would then take a step reduction from the barrage. Also of note is units can't lose the last step of a unit from a barrage. All right, just a couple more notes here. If this unit, in our example here, if this unit ends up rolling a 3, which would DG, all units in the hex become DG, and this, of course, they're immune to GG for some reason based upon your scenario, but all units become DG. If another barrage comes into that hex and DGs them again, it has no effect other than it allows you to get another kill roll. When you do a kill roll and are successful, we'll say in this case our Germans rolled a 6 for the kill roll. If you have any 2 strength units, one of them must take the first attack until all the 2 strength units are flipped over. So if, in this case, we had 2 full strength units in there, one of these units would have to get flipped, and the second attack, let's say this other German unit right here, does an attack and gets a lucky result, and then also rolls a 6 and gets a kill. In this case, the other 2-step unit would have to take a loss before the other unit would take a loss. And then finally, if another unit was able to barrage this hex and remove a 3rd step, it would remove one of those units. And then if another unit was to barrage this hex and get a kill, nothing would happen because the last step of a can never be removed by a barrage. So the other thing of note is you assign all your barrages before you roll for them, because this unit isn't going to wait to find out if this unit does anything. They're all basically shooting at the same time. And there are some restrictions to how many barrages you can put into each hex per turn. So be sure to look at your rules and your module to find out. Sometimes it's 3 barrages plus an airplane barrage as well. But look at your module to see if there's any requirements on how many maximum amount of barrages you can put into a hex. Artillery units that barrage that are adjacent to enemies are only allowed to barrage into that adjacent enemy. So if this unit was trying to barrage a different unit, let's say somebody over here, because this unit's adjacent, he would have to barrage into this hex, which can sometimes be advantageous to the defender, because if he has a half-step unit that's up adjacent to this guy has to barrage into this hex, but he can't kill this unit because, again, the last step can't be removed from the hex by a barrage. So the defender can use some of his weaker units to keep some of the enemies from barraging some of the other units. Now in this case, this unit couldn't barrage over here either. And the reason is he doesn't have anyone adjacent to that enemy. So this unit would have to barrage this hex as well. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There are some modifiers when you're doing barrages and kill numbers. If for some reason the hex is overstacked, right? Let's say there's 4 stacks in here because maybe the Russian player had to retreat into a hex, and then the Germans, so he's got 4 combat units in that hex. So it's overstacked, maybe because of retreat or whatever the reason is. If you get an overstacked hex, you get a -1 modifier to the kill roll. If there's a, sorry, wrong rule there. That's my apologies. Is if it's overstacked, you get a, what is it? Yes, a +1 to the kill roll for each unit that's overstacked above the stacking limit. So in this case, there's 4 units. We get a +1 to the 2 kill roll. That's different than the barrage roll. That's the 2 kill roll. So the first thing you're going to do is the barrage roll to see whether or not it's successful or not. Then you're going to do the 2 kill roll to find out if you actually do any damage to any of the units that are there. If you have 4 units in there, you get a +1. If there's 5 units, you get a +2. If there's 6 units in there, it'll be a +3, etc. If there's only 1 unit in there, in the hex, you get a -1 modifier to the kill roll if there's a single unit in the hex. So again, you want to barrage those hexes that have lots of units in them, because that'll give you more opportunities to do more damage, and it gives you also more steps to remove from your barrages if you're successful on them. So that's a look at at least the first 2 parts, the first 2 phases of the series of play in Standard Combat Series. We did the draw activation chit. Then we did the barrage. Next up will be the road march, and then movement, combat, exploitation, supply, and DG removal. Thanks for watching. Leave your thoughts, comments, suggestions below, and we'll see you next time on the battlefield. This is your host, ID Jester. We'll talk at you next time.